All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon session on creative housing solutions. Um, I'm going to let everybody sign in. I know they're slowly signing in, but I'm going to run through a couple of technical points before we jump into presentations. Just want to make sure everybody who's in attendance knows they are on mute. Please do not unmute yourself. Instead, use the chat box to communicate with us and the presenters. We will save about 15 minutes at the very end for Q&A and some discussion. So if you have comments or things you want to talk about, just send them in through the chat box and we'll wait till the very end to do that. Let's see. So one other quick thing, these sessions are being recorded. So you guys will be receiving a recording of this entire session along with the slides from today. You should be getting your conference daily email. It comes every morning and it's kind of a recap of the day before. So if there are links or you miss something or there's some stuff we have to kind of move quickly through, you guys will receive the slides for those. And we will link all the links that presenters share throughout, if there are any in the chat box, to those same slides. Let's see. I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the panelists for this afternoon. Thank you guys all for participating in this discussion. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and I'll be back at the very end for our Q&A.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ben Hendershot, and I am the Vice President of National Expansion for the Veterans Community Project, and just excited to talk to everyone about our organization and how our tiny homes tie into some of our programming. I'll let the other panelists also introduce themselves, kick it off.
All right, my name is Bill Barberg, President and founder of Insight Formation. And for the last 2 years, I've been organizing and running housing solution summits with lots of different innovators from around the country.
Hi, everybody. Doug Tatro, Senior Associate with the Technical Assistance Collaborative. We're a TA firm that supports HUD and VA. I also work primarily with SSVF, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about shared housing opportunities.
All right, with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to kick it off with the Veterans Community Project. We are a nonprofit based out of Kansas City. We are a fairly new organization as far as 501c3s go and nonprofits. We are in our 5th year of existence, and yeah, just excited to share with you today. So go to the next slide. So we were really created by 4 people who had experience in some capacity or another with other nonprofits, and really just saw a bunch of holes and gaps in services of people who could and could not receive services from other organizations. So the founders really came together and said, if we could create any organization to help all the veterans, what would that look like? And the result of that is what you see today with VCP. Next slide. So in doing so, and really trying to figure out the best solutions to tackle the problem of veteran homelessness, especially in our local community in Kansas City, where we started out, we actually went out to the streets and talked to a lot of veterans in the camps and on the streets and asked them why they didn't want to come in and receive services to the organizations and programs that already existed. And a lot of that came down to security issues and came down to kind of group living type of concerns that a lot of the veterans had, especially with the mental health issues that a lot of them face today. So in doing that, that's how we came to the conclusion that tiny homes would be a good solution to that. So next slide. So our organization is actually really based off of 3 fundamental things, and the first of which is the transitional housing program and the wraparound case management with those transitional houses, which are our tiny homes. That's kind of what we're going to be talking the majority about today, is that section of the nonprofit. We also have an outreach center that is open to not just homeless veterans, but any veteran can walk through the door of our outreach and receive services for any number of things, from basic things such as food and hygiene, all the way up to items such as legal assistance and emergency assistance funding, and really is a resource within the community that ties into really the third thing that we do here at Veterans Community Project, and that's really create a place where the community can really wrap around and love the vet community. A lot of people, want to help veterans and want to help the population in the community, but don't really know how or where to go to do so. So what VCP has really created is a place where anybody can come and offer their services, whatever that may be, whether they are a service provider or their time or their money, and really be able to do more than just kind of stand up and at a ball game or say thank you for your service. So the transitional housing side in that wraparound case management is mostly what we want to touch on today, though. So next slide. So we are also a little bit different in the fact that we serve anyone who took an oath to serve and defend the country. So as long as somebody has a DD 214 and served at least, any amount of time, whether it's a day or 20 years, we really strive to serve everyone, regardless of discharge status, regardless of what that transitional process may look like, or regardless of whether they are VA eligible or not. We really pride ourselves in the ability to serve those that other organizations are not able to. So next slide. So tiny homes, as I touched on earlier, kind of came to be after talking to a lot of the population and some of the concerns they had with the transitional housing available and the shelters and some of those other services provided. So in developing the tiny homes, there was a lot of time and a lot of thought that kind of went into mental health and post-traumatic stress and what that looks like. So there's a lot of thought, even though they are a simple layout inside, that goes into what that actually looks like. So none of the windows face other windows of the homes. When you lay in the bed is placed in the corner, and you can see all the egress points, and you can see basically have a field of view of the entire inside of the tiny home to try to help with some of that mental health type of issues. And it also helps give the veteran a safe place and a secure place where they can really concentrate on their recovery and really concentrate on their programming to really work through whatever issues led them to the homelessness in the first place. Next slide. So this is our village in Kansas City. It's 100% operational. We have 49 tiny homes, and then that is the larger commercial building. There is a community center, and that community center is for the transitional housing or those tiny homes that you see surrounding it. That's where the in-house case management works, as well as other community partners come in to really service the vets on site. As we all know, in the military, a lot of the services are provided in a very centralized location, whether they're buildings right next to each other or within the same building. And a lot of our residents, the most successful they've ever been in their life has been in the military. So we try to really put them back into a place where they were successful at a time in their life where they were successful, and help them transition back into a civilian life and really a permanent housing solution. And that's the other benefit of these tiny homes, is they very much are modeled after what a barracks or a military style type of living scenario would be, which also helps put them back into the mindset. So next slide, please. So within the programming itself, we actually have 5 pillars of support. And those 5 pillars, really, we rate them on how well they're doing to determine whether they are ready for a permanent housing solution. And that permanent housing solution can look many different ways compared to, it can be an apartment for one person. It can be a home ownership. We've had people transition into home ownership. It can be a rental unit. So that permanent housing solution can look different depending on the individual's needs and really what their individual situation is. We are very proud of the fact that as of this year, we're tracking about an 87% success rate of really taking people into the tiny homes and then transitioning them into some type of permanent housing solution. And the average stay has been tracking at between 14 and 16 months. Next slide. So our dream, is to end homeless veteransness everywhere. So when we started this organization, it was really intended to be something where we helped our community and do the best we can for Kansas City here. And as we started this organization and really helping the vets here locally, the amount of support we got from the surrounding community and really got from other municipalities reaching out to us, we kind of felt an obligation to expand this and do as much good as we can for as many veterans out there that are in crisis. Next slide. So that really opened up a national expansion team that we created. And we now have the goal to have 8 cities identified and actively working on projects in them by the end of 2022. Including Kansas City. Right now, we are actively working on 4 projects and are currently working with other municipalities looking for additional cities to expand to as well. So next slide. So this is I put the slide in here just kind of give you an idea of what the SketchUp looks like of one of the tiny homes that we built. After we built the homes in Kansas City, we kind of went back to the drawing boards from lessons learned and how to best utilize the spaces inside. And so we're constantly trying to take lessons learned and move forward and better the program and really better the tiny homes themselves as well. In the national expansion, we have also learned that there can be several different hurdles from communities when dealing with tiny homes in terms of zoning and square footages. And it's very important to have the local governmental support from the local city councils all the way up to the mayor in order to be able to make these projects go. PD seems to be the zoning that most municipalities tend to lean towards when speaking about tiny homes and really how to make a development work. So always learning and we're always trying to just make sure we can help as many people as we can. Next slide. And with that, we'll just kind of conclude it. I'll wait till the end and be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to really share a little bit about who we are and really how we use these tiny homes as a transitional housing facility. So thank you very much.
All right, so I'm Bill Barberg, as I mentioned, and we'll move on here to something that is similar, builds on the concept of tiny homes, but it's something called ADUs, or accessory dwelling units. So I want to be sharing some creative ways that ADUs can create housing opportunities for veterans with a focus on the power of a community-based strategy. So just a quick definition, an ADU, they come in different flavors. Standalone ADUs are typically on a residential property along with a house. Junior ADUs are typically within a house, just a part that's separated off and usually has a separate entrance and a kitchenette. And then frogs are finished rooms over garage. And the frog, this picture here shows an example. There's a lot of empty space above garages that can be turned into a bedroom or even a small ADU rental property. So one of the key definitions is that ADUs are not on wheels. They must be on a foundation. And local rules vary from community to community. ADUs are often 400 to 800 square feet. In some places like California, I believe they can be up to 1,200 square feet. And many cities are changing their zoning and other policies to allow ADUs or junior ADUs. And so I recommend that you get involved with your community policymakers and really encourage them to adopt ADU-friendly policies and zoning. Some of what I'm going to be sharing here is content from the deep dive days of the Housing Solution Summit. And we have one next week with over 25 sessions on homelessness And in September, we have a full day focused on different examples of ADUs and how they can be used in scaling up a community strategy. ADUs really should be an important part of just about any community's housing strategy. And almost most communities have a shortage of housing, but they especially have a shortage of housing for individuals. The chart on the left here shows that the number of more traditional nuclear families has been steadily going down, where the number of single family homes has been going up. But yet, in spite of 28% of people living alone, only 12.5% of the bedrooms in our US housing stock are studio or single bedroom, which means most people end up needing to pay for more home than they need if they can afford it at all, which makes it harder for them to get into housing, more likely to become homeless. And it's especially challenging that there's very few ownership options for single person households that allow them to build that wealth and stability. But ADUs can be a part of addressing that. They're also beneficial because they require fewer materials. They have a lower carbon footprint. They use existing infrastructure that the city has already paid for in terms of streets and water and sewer and fire and police protection and other things that can make it very expensive for the city to add more housing. And since these are often done within areas that are already residential and are closer to where people work and play and such, there's typically reduced transportation costs for people living in ADUs. So they call that a gentle densification. And if some of them are built with an ADU on the second level above a garage, so that can actually increase parking in neighborhoods. Over the last several years, there's been a lot of different nonprofit and for-profit businesses developing different types of manufactured ADUs, modular ADUs, structured insulated panel ADUs, and a lot of creativity to speed up the deployment and building of ADUs and to reduce the cost. But what I want to focus on here is not just the simple what is an ADU, but how communities can come together to reduce costs in general and to create opportunities for veterans specifically. If there's a coalition effort across the community that says we want a lot more ADUs, they can do things like develop standardized designs and give those designs away, which can take $10,000 or more off the cost of building an ADU. If those designs get pre-approved for code compliance, that can cut several weeks off the process of adding an ADU and several $1,000s. If this is being done, say, to try to create housing for hundreds of veterans in a community, there's the opportunity to do that in a way that enables bulk purchasing of materials or appliances. Again, that can cut several $1,000s off the cost. And once you have contractors that are familiar with building these standardized models, they know what it's going to take to build the next one. They don't have to do all the bidding, and they've got their bill of materials that they can get very quickly. So it reduces the cost for a contractor to do it. And because you're repeating these processes, it's easier for do-it-yourself people to work along with professionals or even do it entirely on their own, because you've got a process that's been repeated again and again, and you can have videos and training, and you can actually have a time exchange where someone, maybe a veteran, would get good at one part of the process and could do that for several others, whereas other people would get good at a different part of the process. So they wouldn't just have that first time all the time on every ADU they built. And the city can really help if they reduce the fees or waive the fees, especially if there's a program that's designed to really do this to help veterans. So these are some of the tools that can be done by a community. And an example of this is Clovis, California. And I put up here the award that they won for excellence for downtown revitalization. When they begin adding these backyard cottages, some people were worried about, oh no, we don't want to have shacks in people's backyards. But this actually really became a positive thing for neighborhood revitalization, and they won a national planning award for best practice. So their situation was their older part of town had a lot of long, narrow lots that would go back to an alley with sort of a deep, narrow backyard. And the community was under pressure to add more affordable rental units, but they didn't have a big budget to subsidize and develop housing in a traditional way. And they liked the idea of ADUs in these backyards because there was space for them, but they wanted them to be really well designed, and they wanted them to be a kind of an economic engine to create value for the existing homeowners. So they hired an architect to build 3 different models, one of which had a garage on the first level, and the other 2 had just slightly different designs. They give those plans away for free to people in the community, and they've got a very proactive process of identifying neighborhoods and lots that are well suited for these, and saying, outreaching to those people, and they're pre-approved for code compliance. So a process that if an individual were just to do it on their own, the ADU might be $110,000. Instead, they may be able to get it all in for 75. And that, $20,000+ savings makes a big difference in it being economical for people to do it. And again, if this were done as part of a strategy for veterans, there's ways that you could make this even better. So one possibility is special financing, either for the homeowner or possibly for the veteran to rent the plot from a backyard, which would create a steady rental income from a homeowner. And the veteran could potentially get, say, a $60,000 loan, again, setting up some special financing, possibly using the VASH voucher as a way to pay that mortgage payment. But it would be a loan payment that would be much cheaper than apartment rent and their building value. And being able to coordinate with other volunteers where they could further reduce the costs with sweat equity and working with each other, possibly through an organization like Habitat for Humanity or other types of veteran serving organizations. And there's software that enables what's called a time exchange, where you earn hours for doing tasks and you spend those hours to get other people to help. That could allow people to specialize a little bit more. And you could have a tool lending library where the tools are available to borrow that are needed for different parts of the process. And also integrate some of the social supports, mental and behavioral health, and peer connections. The target for this is probably not people who have been chronically homeless that have a lot of PTSD and other things, but more for people who are financially vulnerable, perhaps earlier in the, a younger veteran, but still really struggling to have stable housing. And in some cases, it might make sense where you've got a neighborhood that's embracing veterans specifically, and having those veterans be part of sort of a neighborhood peacekeeping team, or helping to create a safe, engaged neighborhood in areas where maybe parents are nervous about their kids being outside, but the veterans could actually be having a mission to help keep the neighborhood safe and engaged. But ADUs can be great for veterans, even if it's not the veterans living in the ADUs. And here's a scenario, very common. An older woman, we're fictional, Grace Wilson here, 74 years old, lives in a 3-bedroom home that she owns, but over the last, period of years, she's not really been able to take care of it appropriately. So now it needs some renovation and repairs. A likely scenario would be that she would sell it to an investor who would turn it into a rental property. But in that scenario, she would then likely move to another suburb away from her familiar neighborhood and begin paying rent, drawing down on her savings, which if she lives 20 years or more, her savings could run out because rental costs could keep going up. So she goes from being housing rich to housing insecure. And in a scenario like this, if you look at the kind of the economic dynamics, whoever is renting that property, if it's going to an out-of-state landlord, that's, say, $2,000 that's leaving the local economy every month. Meanwhile, you've got an out-of-state landlord who's doing bare minimum maintenance, so the building is probably deteriorating. The residents aren't going to replace the carpeting or do repairs on their own because it's not their property. So you may have deteriorating conditions and mold and asthma problems that increase the cost to the community. Meanwhile, if the house does increase in value, all of that wealth is leaving the community and benefiting some distant investor. You often have professional property management firms who are just ruthless in using eviction to collect rent, which puts a lot of people in difficult situations once they have eviction on their record. If you're providing rental assistance, that rental assistance isn't building the wealth of the renter, it's building the wealth of the owner, who may be, again, a distant landlord. And there's little commitment to the neighborhood. So there's the risk of deterioration or gentrification. And this whole scenario is not doing anything to increase housing supply. Now, the other scenario that involves an ADU could be very different. Imagine here that Grace decides to add a manufactured ADU to her backyard. She continues to own her home and property, but she moves into the ADU with the help of a nonprofit that's helping seniors. She then rents out her house and uses that money to pay for the ADU. She stays in the neighborhood she's been in. She's building her assets. She's not spending it down because the value of her house and the ADU is growing, giving her more financial security for the future. And she's not in a congregate living where COVID or other, illnesses might spread or there might be restrictions. You can enhance this by building in telehealth, care coordinated and such for seniors. How this involves the veterans, one more slide. So this could be like a manufactured ADU. This is showing an example. They're very energy efficient, low maintenance, and designed for someone perhaps in a wheelchair. So a much better situation than her living in an old deteriorating house with stairs and laundry down in the basement and things like that. Meanwhile, for the veterans, they could be supported to be, as part of a community-wide effort, to be able to move in to the older house that Grace still owns with their landlord living in the backyard, if you will, but being able to work with other veterans, with perhaps, again, Habitat for Humanity or other volunteer organizations and an appropriate professionals as needed to work on the renovations of these older houses, taking advantage of bulk purchasing, tool libraries, and other things. And at the same time, going through a home ownership preparation course, similar to what Habitat for Humanity does when they're helping people become first-time homeowners. The financing and funding of this could also be creative. They may be able to combine possibly a VASH voucher and some sweat rent, even if they don't have a lot of income, to be able to pay for the housing while they're working on making some of the enhancements as they're able to. The homeowner's paying for the materials because they're increasing the value of the home, which they still own. And over, say, 5 years, the value of that property is going up significantly. And the renter has a lot at stake. They're not going to be a derelict renter who's trashing the place and whatever, because the building of the value is allowing them to get what can be called gain sharing, or a shared appreciation that allows them to do either a contract for deed or a down payment to buy the home eventually, based on the fact that they helped grow the value. So in this scenario, you've got a whole lot of benefits. For the modest cost paid for by the homeowner, you're adding a new affordable housing unit without really significant subsidies other than some programs to coordinate things. If you've got a VASH voucher coming in, that's money being pumped into the local economy. The owner is going to be working with the renters to maintain the property, and the renters have an incentive to maintain things. The renters are building sweat equity for a down payment, and as the property value goes up, that goes to the owner and the renter, and that wealth stays in the neighborhood. The city can generate increased taxes in a number of ways. There's a reduced carbon emission because people are now living closer into town and not having to commute as far. And the neighborhood is being enhanced with stable resident ownership rather than distant investors renting out properties. So that gives you an example of some of the ways that accessory dwelling units can be part of a strategy that could provide a lot of innovative and affordable housing options in a program specifically designed to benefit veterans. And we go into some other examples in this full day Housing Solutions Summit Deep Dive Day coming up in September that's all about ADUs. And we have the July session is on preventing and addressing homelessness, not just for veterans, but in general. And we have a webinar for that coming up next week, June 29th, that will introduce some of these concepts. So that's some creative ways that ADUs can be part of a community-wide strategy to increase housing options and meet multiple needs at the same time. Thank you. With that, I will turn it back.
Thanks, Bill and Ben. While those slides get pulled up, I'll introduce myself again. I'm Doug Tatro. I'm with the Technical Assistance Collaborative. We are a TA provider that focuses on training and policy support and program design support for, if you go back one slide, please, yeah, there you go. Thank you. For both HUD and VA, and actually we're one of the lead firms in close partnership with Apt Associates and others, as well as our friends at NCHV for the SSVF program, and have done a lot of work outside of the veteran space as well around ending homelessness. And I think what I want to say sort of up front is that our goal collectively, everybody on this call and who's participated in this conference, is to find ways, creative ways, that we can end homelessness through permanent housing solutions. And I am a firm believer that we will not end homelessness for veterans with one-bedroom apartments and SROs. We have been trying to end homelessness with one-bedroom apartments for 20 plus or 30 plus years, and it has not yet worked. And I think we need to start thinking more creatively about some of the existing stock that we have available to us. So we can go to the next slide, please. We've done a lot of work in the SSVF space, in the rapid rehousing space. There's a lot of work happening in the youth homeless space right now, focused on shared housing and focused on the idea that two or more people may live together in a permanent rental housing unit, sharing that cost, sharing space, and also providing a level of community and social interaction that people often do not get when living alone, particularly folks who may be used to more social interaction in other settings, say in the military or in a shelter setting or transitional setting, where there tends to be more people around and to interact with. When we put people in one-bedroom apartments, that can work really well if those people are able to afford those over time unless they have a long-term subsidy, if they like living alone. But there's a lot of opportunity here, I think, for us to be more creative around the larger housing portfolio that exists. So we'll go to the next slide. We're really talking about roommates, and we use the word shared housing in the technical assistance world, and in the HUD and VA world, we call it shared housing as if it's some other thing other than roommates, other than the normal human condition, frankly, for most people in this country. And we'll go to the next slide. As Bill was sharing, there are many more people who live alone or want to live alone, individual households, than there are one-bedroom units available. And the reality is that most people live with other people, and that people who are a single household or single adult in a household oftentimes can't afford to live alone by finding units that are available to them. So for most of you on this call, I would suspect that you likely live with a spouse or a partner or a friend or somebody you found on Craigslist because you were moving to a new area and you needed to rent a place, and you knew that getting your own one-bedroom apartment was likely to be challenging for you economically or financially. And that may look different for different people, but most people live with other people. My wife is my roommate in this regard. And as much as we're not advocating for trying to play the dating game with veterans so much in a romantic sense, we do understand that the combined income force between me and my wife allow me to live where I live. And it opens up new opportunities for the types of housing that me and my family can access, afford, and that is comfortable for us. So most people, I see there's about 90 or so folks on this call, most of us live in shared housing. Most of us share the place that we live with somebody else. And I think for too long, we have looked at creating roommate arrangements as more of a headache, more of a forced challenge than it has been an opportunity for us as homeless service providers in a consortium, a community of people who are trying to end homelessness among veterans. And it's going to take a lot of these strategies that we've heard before around new development, creative ways to develop new types of units that allow for that affordability, allow us to integrate into communities and really make sure that the housing that we're building is integrated not within the context of homelessness, but within the context of being housed in a community. And part of that strategy is revisiting, I think, some of the areas that we've been overlooking in the housing portfolios that we've overlooked for a while. So we go to the next slide, please. So homelessness is not rocket science. It's challenging, but there's some simple things we need to consider when we're talking about creative housing strategies, whether it be some of the presenters from earlier or shared housing in general. We all want to end homelessness. Let's call that a fact. We want to end it with permanent housing solutions because folks, until they're permanently housed, are considered homeless. I don't believe, and I think I'll call this a fact, that we're going to end homelessness with one-bedroom apartments and SROs. There simply are not enough of them out there, and the ones that are out there are unaffordable for the type of population that is seeking the assistance that we have to provide, right? So even if we had all the one-bedroom apartments, if they're all at $2,200 a month in downtown, that doesn't help us solve homelessness for people who are in poverty. We're not going to necessarily solve poverty, and we need to reconsider what affordability means in many ways. What we need to be thinking about is what is the type of level of financial stability that is going to allow someone to sustain their housing. We've always talked about affordability as being 30% of somebody's income, maybe 40% with certain types of vouchers of their income is what we might consider to be affordable housing. My bet is that a majority or a strong minority of the folks on this call right now pay more than 30% of their income toward their housing costs. And so we have to stop thinking so much confined to this idea that if we're going to have somebody be stably housed or sustainably housed, that their income needs to be 30% of the rent, otherwise we can't house them there, and start thinking about how many dollars is it going to take to get them through that next month, and how do we continue to support them in making sure they can sustain their housing? Because we're not solving poverty, we're solving homelessness. And if that is our mission, if our mission has that distinction between solving poverty and solving homelessness, we have to be realistic about that and acknowledge too that for many folks coming out of homelessness, where they go now may not be where they need to be forever, but it offers a stepping stone into the rental market, into the stability that housing offers people to be able to grow their income or to pay their back debts or to reunite with family or to overcome or pursue services relative to their health or behavioral health, if they so choose to do so. And so acknowledging where we are, I think, is important. And we'll go to the next slide. And this is sort of the obvious piece. This is the piece that, we put a chart together just to show it. This is a general mid-sized city in the United States. It's an actual city that I use these numbers for in the South. It's a city of about 220,000 people. And their FMR in that city, based on HUD's guidance, which is what VA follows for many of its programs and the PHAs, is $735 a month. For a 2-bedroom, it's $849 and $1,140 on a 3-bedroom. We all know that FMRs are not real. They are not reasonable. They don't make any sense in most rental markets. In most rental markets, there's a rent reasonableness factor. So I made the assumption that from a 735 FMR, it's $850, $1,050, and $1,300 respectively for 2 and 3 bedrooms. Now, if we take the national $783 a month payment of SSI only recipients for their income, that's $783 a month. So if you have an elderly person or somebody who is only on SSI, and I know there's VA benefits involved, but we're trying to at least get a general sense of what this looks like in a deep poverty situation. Somebody trying to rent a 1-bedroom apartment at that FMR, knowing the reasonableness in this mid-sized cities of 220,000 people, their rent alone, not including their groceries, not including their utilities, not including getting their grandchild or child or mom or dad a birthday gift once a year, or being able to go buy soap, is 108% of their overall income. So there's no feasible way without a long-term subsidy that individual or that household is going to be able to sustain their housing. Now, that same individual is put into a 2-bedroom unit, and a 2-bedroom unit is not twice as expensive as a 1-bedroom unit. So their purchasing power with the income that they do have is going to elevate exponentially greater than or proportionally greater than the rise in the rent. So at $1,050 in rent reasonable, cost per person per bedroom is $520. We're now at 66% of that person's $783 income, right? So now they can pay the rent. they're severely rent burdened, but they can pay the rent, and they might just have enough to get by with some SNAP benefits and still be able to buy their grandchild a birthday gift once a year, right? They can still maintain some level of quality of life. Now let's look at a 3-bedroom. Let's go and look at single family homes that may have 3 bedrooms. Going back to Bill's presentation, the opportunity for the veteran to come into that single family home, you could think about that as individual veterans as well coming in and looking at 3 bedrooms divided up. Now we're at 55% of their overall income contributing. Again, we're continuing to add affordability to this mix by putting more people together by their choice. And there's a slide on this I may not get to with time, but just to remind us, shared housing is an active process that allows folks to make choices about with whom and where they want to live. And their alternatives to living with other people are to not live with other people. But where we may have opportunities to put 2 or 3 folks together who are tonight in homelessness, and really they're going to need the services of, say, a rapid rehousing support for a few months, get stabilized, but they need the affordability. That is the challenge that they face. We need to start thinking about what these numbers really say to us. So let's go to the next slide. Money matters, but so do options, right? This is a 1-day Zillow search in the same mid-sized city, right? So this is a city of 220,000 people. I did a 1-day Zillow search about 3 weeks ago, and I said, how many 1-bedroom listings are there? And there were 43 listings for 1-bedroom apartments on that one day on that one website in this one city. If I confined it to not including 1 bedrooms, but only 2 bedrooms, I found 87 listings, which is 174 bedrooms available within the market of 2-bedroom homes or apartments. I did the same thing for 3 beds, take out my 1 beds and my 2 beds and only do 3 bedrooms. And I found 85 listings, many of which were single family homes that were up for rent. That's 255 bedroom units. So by expanding and considering roommate and room sharing and house sharing opportunities, we have now expanded the number of bedroom units, the number of places for people to live from 43 on that single day to 472, right? So we have added 400 more bedroom units to our overall landlord outreach portfolio, our overall strategy for trying to engage with landlords, housing owners, and others, and adding choice. Now we know, realistically, most of these units are not going to go to people coming out of homelessness for a myriad of reasons. But if we think about it proportionally, if it was going to be 10%, then we still went from having 4 available units to us, or 4 people that we could house in that city on that one day with the units that were available, to having 40. So we have seen a 10-fold increase in the availability or the number of bedrooms available to us. The reality of the world is that people cannot afford to live alone in 1-bedroom apartments that are built right now in most places, and particularly the people who are in poverty and those who are experiencing homelessness. Now, absent a voucher, and even with a voucher, there are still affordability challenges, but we have to open our horizon to recognize that the housing market is not confined to single bedroom or SRO units. It's just not. So we'll go to the next slide, please. I just want to offer a couple of community examples really quickly. First, we need to make sure this is a client-driven, choice-driven opportunity. We're not forcing people into shared housing. It is based on what they are choosing for their own housing pathway out of homelessness with our support. Roommates choose each other, and it's an important stepping stone. And for the SSVF world and the HUD-BASH world, we just published last year and are refining now a shared housing toolkit that actually talks about how you can use shared housing both for SSVF and HUD-BASH, and I would encourage folks to look at that. And I know I have about 2 minutes here, so I want to go to the next slide. There's some really cool stuff happening out there right now. And I'm going to go to the next slide if you could. Thank you. There's some cool stuff happening. So we're working with a group in South Florida that's just getting this launched. Many of you may have kids going to college, and now when you go to college, if you're living in the dorms, they offer an app like Swipe Right, Swipe Left that allow you to articulate your roommate preferences. And they use those roommate preferences to pair kids together who they think will get along or at least not get into fistfights in their freshman year of college. So there's a community that I'm working with now in South Florida who is working with the vendor, the app maker or the technology company that does those university apps, and they're adapting the questionnaire that is asked, and they are they're going to begin to use that with veterans to offer, if you're willing to live with somebody here's some of the realities of the market. What are some of the things that you would want in a roommate or not, right? Do you not want to live with a smoker? Do you not want to live with somebody who's actively using? Do you want to live with somebody who's actively using? What are your nighttime hours? Do you like to party? Do you not like to party, right? Do you like a neat house? Do you not like a neat house? Do you have gender preferences? Those types of things that really get into the day-to-day life of folks that have to live together. And this app is going to then create essentially a dashboard of potential matches. So it might say that Bill and Ben, it looks like you have some common interests. Why don't we go and have you guys get a cup of coffee and see if it's worth trying to look for an apartment together? Because we know you'll probably be able to afford something with some of our support in the front end if we can get your income combined on that, right? And so it's a really innovative way to take pre-existing technology. It's cheap, and they're going to apply it to this roommate matching. And we'll go 2 slides ahead, please, because I know I'm about out of time. Another one here, this is a rural community. They're using diversion and problem-solving strategies throughout their coordinated entry process, and they're building directly into their initial discussions with people who are coming to them in crisis, either on the phone or in their community-based shelter system. And instead of just intaking and sending them to the shelter bed, they're sitting down, they're getting to know folks, getting to understand what their housing situation is. And part of that initial conversation is talking about whether they've lived with people before. How did that work out? Are there any opportunities in the community of people that you know that you might be able to stay with so you don't have to be homeless today? If not, if they become homeless and we can't divert them, what opportunities might exist for you living with somebody else? So not only does this really create an early and often engagement with the client, but it builds the culture of looking at these creative solutions into the community overall. And so thinking about how we can embed not a different program, right? For SSVF, many of you are familiar with, it's not we're not doing, oh, you're going to the shared housing program. No, it's just another option that we can employ, another tool in our toolbox when folks are willing to live together, when it would make sense for them, both for their own financial needs, but also if they're willing to do that and willing to get along. May not be without conflict. I doubt there's anyone here who lives with someone who's never had a conflict before with their roommate or their spouse or partner, a person from Craigslist. But it's a viable pathway for many people, and it's a realistic pathway for many people. And I firmly believe that our landlord outreach opportunities and strategies are greatly expanded if we actually, pursue this entire market that the homeless crisis response systems and the housing systems have all but ignored for the past 30 years, trying to have everybody live by themselves and on their own. So again, I'll mention in closing, the SSVF has produced some shared housing toolkit. It talks about how leases are structured. It talks about how you can pair subsidies or not with subsidies. You can have somebody going in as a roommate with somebody that's not subsidized at all. HUD has also produced quite a bit of information. And on the SSVF website, for anybody interested, we've done a number of shared housing trainings, full day trainings, half day trainings, on how to work with roommates, how to think about case management models that support both. And all of those materials are available publicly on that VA website as well. So, take a look at those things. And our team on the SSVF side at TAC and at F Associates is always happy to talk about this issue because I think many of us really believe in it. So I'll stop there, and I think we're about at question time.
All right, thank you. Thank you guys all. That was great information, and I've been seeing the chat box filled this entire time. So some of the stuff might be covered in the chat, but we're still going to open it up for discussion, just because some of the questions might have been directed at each of you during your presentations, and I want to give everybody the opportunity to comment on them together. One thing that you just mentioned, Doug, and I want to, I guess, present the same question to Bill and Ben, and I'm not seeing Ben, but oh, there he is. So you touched on using SSVF, HUD Bash, and housing choice vouchers for shared housing arrangements. Can the two of you touch on if you are aware of HUD Bash and SSVF and those other supportive programs can be used in the housing solutions you guys suggested?
Yeah, I'll comment. One of the case studies is by a company called Yard Homes Minnesota. And what they do is they work with adding a manufactured ADU to a property that's owned by a community land trust that has another house on it. And they work with a veteran serving organization to have them place a veteran in the accessory dwelling unit. And they use the VASH voucher to pay them for that. And they give a share of that rental money from the VASH voucher to the person living on the house who's also on the community land trust, who's doing a rent to own. And after 10 years, they give the home, they give the ADU to the person who's in the other house. So they're combining a number of things in a really creative way. So I don't know that it works in every scenario, but they've found that it can certainly work in a creative scenario that creates income for a renter, creates affordable space using the VASH vouchers, and ultimately ownership for someone who probably wouldn't have had a chance to own it otherwise.
And just to say, SSVF can be used for this, for like, so if a unit meets HQS, which is the federal standard for the unit that someone needs to go into, and Bill, if HUD-VASH can go there, then SSVF can go there. And if there's a permanent lease, if they're a leaseholder with full tenancy rights, then SSVF Rapid Rehousing Assistance could support any of those pieces. But those are critical, HQS, and that it's permanent housing. It's not transitional, and it's not, there's no time limit other than what's stipulated in the lease for the veteran, but SSVF would be able to contribute to those.
And I guess same question for you, Ben, in y'all's properties and in the practice of using tiny homes, can these subsidies be used?
Not in our particular structure, they cannot. We are a transitional housing facility. So our goal is really to take people who are street homeless and then help them transition into some type of a permanent housing solution, which sometimes are some of these types of things that we're talking about with HUD and whatnot, SSVF. But in our particular programming, we don't charge any rent for any of our residents. The rent is really them working through the program to become permanent housing ready. So.
Great, okay. One comment that we just got was about the shared housing arrangements, and their comment is kind of like, I guess certain programs frowning on this because of the roommate pairing and the possible breakdown in roommate relationships and stuff. So can you just touch on how that actually works, the pairing?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is making sure that you're one, it's based on choice, but making sure that you're having folks meet together and get to know each other before they go into the unit, or at least trying to support that process. I think we need to remind ourselves that it is not our choice as providers to decide whether or not two people should live together. I think our job is to support conversations that allow us to look for creative solutions. So for instance, if somebody has an addiction, that to me is not a flag that says you can't live with somebody else. And in fact, it may be two people that can support each other. And it's really none of our business if they have an addiction, if they're in permanent housing. So I think matching roommates is one of the most critical pieces. If we're going to be supporting these as programs, we need to create opportunities for people to understand what the implications of living with other people are, how we're going to test that. And I think what's important, Bill mentioned this in a comment in the chat, I think, is around that proactive case management model and really being deliberate about how the relationship between the two roommates is being supported by the project or by case managers, and also having backfill from supervision where a case manager may be getting pulled in two different directions within the home based on the needs of each veteran or each roommate, that there's some sort of way to bring in supervisor support for that. So really thinking about that. But I mentioned like the swipe right, swipe left thing. That's a fancy way of doing a questionnaire. What are the type of people that you might be considered living with? Or if a veteran identifies that, we have veterans that we know are in encampments right now. And part of the reason they stay in encampments or stay outside is because they've got buddies out there. And if we can offer them an opportunity to come inside into housing with those same folks and not be isolated, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I would emphasize in the comment that it is some cases, but that should be based on the veteran's choice. That's not your choice as a program to decide whether or not you're going to let a veteran live with somebody else. Their housing solutions are driven by what they desire, and we support that. And however that looks, whether they're still actively using or not, or any other situations. And roommate conflicts are going to happen. If they don't get them evicted and nobody gets hurt, then their house, they're not homeless, and we're doing our job.
Great. Okay, so I think you made it clear that tiny homes, you guys vision those mostly as transitional temporary housing. For ADUs and shared housing, how permanent is permanent? How temporary is temporary? Like, are these something that fall in the middle? Would these ever be considered permanent options in any of the cases, any of the three examples?
Yeah, they definitely can be permanent. There's no reason, I think, why they wouldn't be if you had a person that was, either the scenarios that I raised, they can definitely be long-term.
As far as tiny homes go, there can absolutely be a scenario where they are a permanent housing solution. That is not necessarily what our organization is based our programming around, but there's absolutely a scenario out there where it could be used as a permanent housing.
Great. And then Ben, I did see you getting back to a lot of people in the chat, but especially with transitional and temporary housing, there are a lot of limitations for veterans that have pets or families, even certain disabilities and things like that. So can you just touch again on if you guys allow that in your tiny home communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are pet friendly. We have all different types of animals in our village living right now, from dogs and cats to geckos and snakes. So we really find it very important to eliminate as many barriers as possible from getting people off of the streets. And if a pet is a barrier for them, it's absolutely something we're willing to work with them on. So.
Great. Okay. And then I guess the question to kind of wrap it up, I'm still scrolling through the chat, but it looks like you guys got to most of them, the one-on-one questions in there. So one thing we stress at NCHV when we were looking at some of these creative solutions in our own products is not doing these type of solutions in isolation, like really involving your continuum of care and VA and other people that are involved in the housing entire system in your communities. So can you guys each kind of give us a closing comment on how you suggest communities make sure if they are going to try these type of solutions that they are connected to the larger mainstream housing systems that already exist?
Well, I think it's important that communities come together and develop a strategy for how they're going to deal with the housing, because so often it's just people opposing something. And it's much more productive when you gather people and say, what kind of neighborhoods do we want? What are the threats from outside investors buying up properties? What are the opportunities? And how do we create the kind of neighborhoods and opportunities that we want? And that takes effort, but having a strategy can then start to say, how do the different things fit in, and how can veterans, among others, be served?
I would also say that cooperation between different programs, between different agencies, and really between landlords and programs can really help solve a lot of the issues as well. We need communities as a whole need to stop competing with each other and really just come together to figure out how to work through some of these challenges.
And I would piggyback that. And I think one of the other pieces, it's not direct on shared housing, but really a lot of housing, is that programs are competing for the same landlords. They're competing for the units. And a whole nother discussion, is around centralized landlord outreach and engagement strategies that are community based, that are transparent and apply to all the community partners. And you can do that with shared housing as well across programs, but also integrating that with your housing partner outreach strategy and linking all those pieces together so we're not all working in silos.
Great. Okay. Well, good stuff. And I see nothing but positive feedback in the comments section. It looks like people are happy to hear some newer housing ideas and just talk about new topics. So it was refreshing. Thank you guys again for participating in the discussion today and for your presentations. And thank you to everybody who's in attendance. I just want to remind you guys one more time, you will receive this recording as well as slides. So check your emails tomorrow morning for our conference recap from today. That's nothing else. I think I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go. You guys have a great afternoon. All right. Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
Thank you.